Rachel Coleman, a rising star in the corporate world, faces shocking discrimination at a luxurious hotel when her reservation is denied. But Rachel doesn't just take the insult. She fights back in ways no one sees coming. How will this jaw-dropping showdown end, and what lessons will be learned from her bravery? Before diving into this unforgettable story, let us know where you're watching from today, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge the way we think. Rachel Coleman stepped out of her sleek rental car, the soft click of her heels echoing against the cobblestones of the Grand Lux Hotel driveway. She tilted her head back to take in the grandeur of the building, gleaming marble columns, glass doors reflecting the city's glittering skyline, and a line of valets rushing to accommodate guests. It was a place that promised luxury, exclusivity, and respect. Rachel had been looking forward to this weekend for months. After closing the biggest deal of her career as a marketing executive, she allowed herself a rare indulgence, a stay in the presidential suite at one of the city's most renowned hotels. It wasn't just about the luxury, it was a celebration of everything she had overcome. As a black woman in corporate America, she had faced her share of doubters and outright hostility. This weekend was her victory lap. She stepped inside the cool, elegant lobby where the scent of fresh lilies mingled with the faint aroma of coffee. Guests milled about, business people with leather briefcases, families snapping pictures by the grand piano, and a couple taking selfies near a towering waterfall feature. Rachel smiled to herself, feeling every bit the successful professional she was. At the reception desk, a young man in a crisp uniform greeted her with a rehearsed smile. His name tag read James Thompson. He looked up, his cheerful expression flickering for a brief moment when his eyes landed on Rachel. "Welcome to the Grand Lux Hotel. Do you have a reservation?" he asked, his voice clipped and overly formal. "Yes, I do," Rachel replied with a polite smile, sliding her reservation confirmation across the counter. "I booked the presidential suite for the weekend." James's brows furrowed as he glanced at the screen. "One moment, please." Rachel watched as he clicked away at the keyboard. The smile she'd seen earlier was replaced by a slight tightening of his lips. His eyes darted from the screen to her, then back again. The change in his demeanor was subtle, but Rachel had learned to recognize it. A lifetime of microaggressions had made her fluent. "Miss Coleman," James began, his tone carefully neutral. "It seems there's been a mistake. The presidential suite is no longer available. We had an unexpected extension from another guest." Rachel blinked, her calm exterior belying the irritation rising within her. "Excuse me? I booked this suite weeks ago. Are you saying it's no longer available even though I have a confirmation?" James hesitated, tapping his keyboard again as if searching for an answer that would satisfy her. "I understand your frustration, but these things happen occasionally. We can offer you one of our deluxe rooms instead. It's a wonderful option, and I'm sure you'll be comfortable." Rachel took a deep breath. She wasn't going to lose her composure, not here, not now. "With all due respect, I didn't book a deluxe room. I booked the presidential suite. I made this reservation in advance and have the confirmation right here. I'd like to speak with your manager." James's shoulders stiffened. "Ma'am, I'm trying to resolve this for you, but—" "Manager." "Now please," Rachel interrupted, her voice firm but controlled. James pressed his lips into a thin line, clearly unhappy, but he picked up the phone and murmured into the receiver. A moment later, a woman in her late 40s appeared, her tailored blazer and sharp heels clicking against the polished floor. Her name tag read, Margaret DeLuca. Margaret offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening, Miss Coleman. I'm Margaret. How can I assist you?" Rachel explained the situation calmly, showing her reservation confirmation once again. Margaret took the printout, her expression impassive as she glanced over it. "I see," Margaret said finally, handing the paper back. "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience, Miss Coleman. Unfortunately, the suite you reserved is no longer available due to a scheduling overlap. These situations are rare, but they do happen." Rachel felt her jaw tighten. Is DeLuca, I don't understand. I have a confirmed reservation. How does someone else get to extend their stay at the expense of a guest who booked in advance? Margaret clasped her hands in front of her. I assure you this wasn't intentional. We'd be happy to upgrade you to one of our premier suites at no additional charge. I believe it would meet your expectations. It's not about expectations, Rachel replied, her voice steady. It's about honoring commitments. I reserved the presidential suite, and that's what I expect to receive. Would this same situation happen if I were someone else? Margaret blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. Her smile faltered before she recovered. Mrs. Coleman, I assure you this has nothing to do with anything other than logistics. We treat all our guests equally. Rachel stared at her for a moment, her instincts telling her otherwise. She'd faced too many instances of being treated as less than in spaces like this, exclusive, predominantly white spaces where people like her were seen as outliers. She could feel the stares of other guests behind her, the whispers as they wondered what the commotion was about. She straightened her shoulders. I don't believe that's the case, Ms. DeLuca. I'd like to speak to the hotel's general manager. Margaret's composed mask cracked slightly. I am the acting general manager this evening. Then I'll wait for the owner, Rachel said simply. Margaret opened her mouth as if to protest, but Rachel's unyielding gaze stopped her. Without another word, Margaret turned on her heel and disappeared into the back office. Rachel let out a slow breath, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to walk away, to avoid the fight altogether, but another part, the part that had clawed her way up the corporate ladder, that refused to let anyone question her place in the world, wouldn't allow it. She had every right to be here, and she wasn't going to let anyone diminish her. A few minutes later, Margaret returned, flanked by an older man in a tailored suit. His silver hair and confident stride exuded authority. This must be the owner. Ms. Coleman, he began, his tone smoother than Margaret's but no less patronizing. I'm terribly sorry for this inconvenience. I assure you, it's not our intention to make you feel unwelcome. Then honor my reservation, Rachel said firmly. The man smiled thinly. I'm afraid that's not possible. The suite is occupied and I can't ask our other guests to leave. Rachel crossed her arms. Then I'll be sharing my experience with my followers online. I'm sure they'll be interested to hear how the Grand Lux treats paying customers. The man's expression darkened for just a moment before he quickly recovered. Ms. Coleman, there's no need for that. Let's discuss this privately. No, thank you, Rachel said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the lobby. This isn't just about me. This is about how people are treated based on how they look. I'm not going anywhere until this is made right. As Rachel stood her ground, the tension in the air thickened. But Rachel had made up her mind. This wasn't just about a suite. It was about her dignity. Margaret DeLuca's forced smile lingered for only a moment before she turned back toward the office, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor. Rachel remained planted near the reception desk, her hands resting calmly on the counter. But her presence was magnetic. Guests whispered from behind magazines, curious eyes darting toward her, while the bellhop who had been polishing the brass luggage cart stopped mid-motion to watch. Rachel could feel the weight of their gazes, but she didn't flinch. If she backed down now, it would send a message that she was willing to accept less, to be treated as though she didn't belong. She thought of all the other people who had been subtly or overtly turned away from spaces they deserved to be in, people who had decided it wasn't worth the fight. Not today, she thought. Margaret returned with the older man Rachel had seen earlier. His name tag read William Hargrove, owner. He approached with a polished confidence, the kind of demeanor reserved for people used to having their authority go unquestioned. William extended a hand toward Rachel, but she kept her arms crossed, her calm expression unwavering. As Coleman, I'm William Hargrove, the owner of the Grand Lux Hotel, he said smoothly. I understand there's been some miscommunication regarding your reservation. Miscommunication? Rachel asked, her tone steady but pointed. I booked the presidential suite weeks ago. I received confirmation, I paid in advance, and yet I'm being told the room isn't available. That's not a miscommunication. That's a breach of contract." William nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I do apologize for the inconvenience, truly. Unfortunately, the suite was extended to another guest, a long-standing client who requested an additional night. I'm sure you understand these situations can arise." Rachel's gaze didn't waver. "What I understand is that I booked this suite first. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's blatant disrespect." William's smile faltered slightly. "I assure you, that's not our intention." "Intent doesn't matter as much as impact, Mr. Hargrove," Rachel said, her voice firm but calm. "Would this same situation have occurred if I didn't look the way I do? Because I can't help but notice that everyone else in this lobby has been greeted with smiles and red carpet treatment, while I've been given excuses." The room seemed to hold its breath. William hesitated, glancing at Margaret, who shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Miss Coleman, please, let's move to my office to discuss this matter privately," William said. "No," Rachel replied. Her voice carried a weight that made everyone in earshot pause. "We're not going to handle this in the shadows. This isn't just about me. It's about the principles of your establishment. You can't preach luxury and inclusivity while failing to honor your commitments to guests." Margaret stepped forward, her tone pleading. "Mr. Coleman, we're prepared to offer you a complimentary upgrade to one of our premier suites, along with a dining credit to make up for the inconvenience. I think you'll find—" "Do you hear yourself, Ms. DeLuca?" Rachel interrupted, her voice cutting through Margaret's rehearsed placation. "You're offering me an upgrade to a room that's objectively inferior to the one I booked. Do you think that's acceptable compensation for being disrespected in front of a lobby full of people?" Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but William raised a hand, silencing her. He looked at Rachel carefully, measuring her resolve. "Exercise. Miss Coleman," he began, his tone softening, "this has clearly upset you, and that was never our intention. We value all our guests equally." "No, you don't," Rachel said flatly, "because if you did, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would have honored my reservation instead of prioritizing someone else. You wouldn't have allowed your staff to treat me with subtle but unmistakable condescension. You'd be finding a way to fix this instead of defending the indefensible." The room buzzed softly as whispers spread among the onlookers. Rachel turned her attention briefly to a group of well-dressed business people huddled by the lobby cafe. One of them, a woman with blonde hair and an expensive-looking pantsuit, offered Rachel a small nod of support, while others glanced away awkwardly. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly, snapping a picture of the reception desk and the hotel logo in the background. She began typing. "What are you doing?" Margaret asked, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "I'm documenting this experience," Rachel said without looking up. "It's amazing how much accountability people find when the world is watching." Margaret and William exchanged alarmed glances. "Michelle Coleman, there's no need to escalate things further," William said, his voice losing some of its polish. "Let's resolve this in a way that's satisfactory to both parties." "Here's what's satisfactory to me," Rachel said, placing her phone down for a moment. "Honor my reservation, compensate me for the time I've spent dealing with this nonsense, and make a public commitment to addressing the biases that allow situations like this to occur." William looked flustered for the first time. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the sound of a camera shutter echoed through the lobby. Rachel turned to see a bystander taking a picture of the scene, quickly followed by another guest filming with their phone. The ripple effect had begun. Rachel's own phone buzzed as she saw the likes and retweets piling up on her post. People were already commenting, some outraged, others sharing their own experiences of discrimination in spaces like this. "Ms. Coleman," William said, his voice now tinged with desperation, "I'm asking you to work with us here. Social media attention can be damaging." "Then you should have thought about that before dismissing me," Rachel said coolly. This isn't about revenge or even going viral. It's about making sure no one else has to deal with this. At that moment, a young woman in a hotel uniform approached. She looked nervous, glancing between Rachel and William. "Excuse me, sir," she said to William, her voice quiet. "There's a news crew outside. They're asking about a story regarding discrimination." William's face paled. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, and Rachel felt a small but satisfying flicker of vindication. "I'll handle it," William said sharply, then turned back to Rachel. "Miss Coleman, I implore you, let's find a solution here before things spiral further." Rachel looked him straight in the eye, her expression calm but unyielding. "The solution is simple, Mr. Hargrove. Do the right thing." For a long moment William said nothing, his jaw tightening as the weight of the situation settled on him. Finally he turned to Margaret. "Ensure the presidential suite is prepared immediately," he said through gritted teeth. "And arrange for Ms. Coleman's stay to be fully comped. I'll handle the rest." Margaret nodded, her face tight with frustration, and scurried away. William turned back to Rachel, his smile forced but present. "Your suite will be ready shortly," he said. "I hope we can put this unpleasantness behind us." Rachel picked up her phone and met his gaze. "That depends on what you do next, Mr. Hargrove." As William retreated to the back office, Rachel stood tall in the middle of the lobby, the whispers around her fading into background noise. She had won this round, but the battle wasn't over. The fight for respect and equality never really ended. Rachel Coleman stood in the marble-floored lobby of the Grand Lux Hotel, her arms folded as the murmur of onlookers filled the air. Guests whispered among themselves, some nodding in silent agreement with her stance, others simply watching as if witnessing a spectacle they couldn't pull away from. She glanced at her phone. The post she had made about the situation was already gaining traction, with comments of support flooding in. The tension in the room was palpable when Margaret returned. The forced professionalism on her face couldn't mask the nervousness in her eyes. "Miss Coleman, your suite is ready. The staff is preparing it to your specifications, and we will ensure everything is perfect for your stay." Rachel raised an eyebrow, her stance unwavering. "Perfect for my stay? You should be concerned about more than just my stay, Ms. DeLuca." Margaret hesitated, as if unsure how to respond, before giving a tight nod and retreating to her desk. Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up to something much larger than a single hotel reservation. The presidential suite was as opulent as the brochures described. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline, plush furnishings, and a private terrace with its own infinity pool. But Rachel couldn't enjoy any of it yet. She unpacked her suitcase slowly, her thoughts racing as she prepared for the next step. Sitting at the suite's mahogany desk, Rachel opened her laptop and began typing. She drafted a carefully worded post to accompany the video clips and photos she had gathered from the incident downstairs. Her message wasn't about anger or personal vengeance. It was about systemic issues in the hospitality industry, about the subtle biases that led to moments like these. Her post read, "The Grand Lux Hotel incident isn't just about a room. It's about how people of color are often made to feel like they don't belong in spaces that promise luxury for all. This happens every day, in ways big and small, to countless people who don't have the resources to fight back. Today I stood my ground, but this fight is far from over. If you've experienced discrimination in spaces like these, share your story. Let's ensure everyone feels they belong." She attached the video of the confrontation in the lobby and hit post. Within minutes, her notifications began to blow up. Influencers, activists, and even media outlets began resharing her story, amplifying her voice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Rachel stepped onto the terrace to gather her thoughts. She knew this wasn't over. The hotel had reluctantly given her the suite, but the systemic issues that allowed the discrimination to occur were still deeply rooted. A knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. When she opened it, William Hargrove stood there, flanked by Margaret. His expression was a carefully composed mix of regret and professionalism. "Miss Coleman," William began, his voice quieter than it had been in the lobby. "May we come in?" Rachel stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. She crossed her arms as they stood awkwardly in the center of the suite. "I wanted to apologize again," William said, his tone softer now, less rehearsed. "What happened today was unacceptable. We've reviewed the situation and it's clear mistakes were made." "Mistakes," Rachel repeated, her voice steady but pointed. "Is that what we're calling systemic bias now?" William flinched slightly, but to his credit he didn't try to argue. "You're right," he admitted. "And I'd like to do more than apologize. I want to make real changes here. Our training, our policies, even the way we approach customer service. It all needs to be re-examined." Rachel studied him carefully, searching for signs of sincerity. "Why should I believe you?" she asked. "You only came to this conclusion because you were forced to. If there hadn't been cameras or witnesses, you would have let this slide." William nodded, the tension in his shoulders visible. "You're right again. But this is an opportunity to learn. I've already contacted a diversity consultant to help us address these issues head-on. And if you're willing, I'd like to work with you directly. Your insight could help us improve not just here, but across the hospitality industry." Rachel didn't respond immediately. She walked over to the large windows, staring out at the city lights. Part of her wanted to dismiss his offer, to walk away and leave them to figure it out themselves. But another part of her saw the opportunity to create real change. "I'll think about it," she said finally, turning back to face him. "But understand this, I'm not here to make you look good. If I agree, it's because I want to ensure no one else has to go through what I did." William nodded, relief flickering across his face. "That's all I can ask. Thank you, Miss Coleman." As they left, Rachel felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The fight wasn't over, but she had taken the first. The next morning, Rachel woke to find her social media post had gone viral. National news outlets had picked up the story, and hashtags like "Change in Luxury" and "Stand with Rachel" were trending. People from all walks of life were sharing their own experiences, creating a groundswell of voices demanding accountability. Rachel spent the morning responding to messages of support and organizing her thoughts for the days ahead. She drafted an email to the diversity consultant William had mentioned, outlining her ideas for actionable change. If she was going to be involved, it would be on her terms. Later that afternoon, she held an impromptu press conference on the hotel terrace, with reporters from major outlets eager to hear her story. Rachel spoke with grace and determination, emphasizing that this wasn't just about her. It was about creating a world where no one felt like they didn't belong. "This isn't just about one hotel or one incident," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "It's about challenging the systems and attitudes that allow discrimination to persist. We all deserve to feel welcome, no matter where we are." By the time Rachel checked out of the Grand Lux Hotel 2 days later, the atmosphere had shifted. Employees treated her with the utmost respect, not out of fear, but because her presence had sparked conversations among the staff. Some even thanked her quietly for standing up. As she handed over her keycard at the front desk, Margaret approached her, looking less frazzled than she had the first day. "Mrs. Coleman," she said, her voice softer now, almost earnest. "I just wanted to say thank you. You opened my eyes to things I hadn't seen before." Rachel gave a small smile. "It's not about me, Margaret. It's about what you do with this moving forward." Margaret nodded, her expression thoughtful. As Rachel walked out of the Grand Lux Hotel, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. This wasn't the end, it never truly was, but it was a victory. And for now, that was enough.